Hey, Prime members. Are you tired of ads interfering with your favorite podcasts? Good news. With Amazon Music, you have access to the largest catalog of ad-free top podcasts included with your Prime membership. To start listening, download the Amazon Music app for free or go to amazon.com/ad-free podcasts. That's amazon.com/ad-free podcasts to catch up on the latest episodes without the ads.
I'm no tech genius, but I knew if I wanted my business to crush it, I needed a website now. Thankfully, Bluehost made it easy. I customized, optimized, and monetized everything exactly how I wanted with AI. In minutes, my site was up. I couldn't believe it. The search engine tools even helped me get more site visitors. Whatever your passion project is, you can set it up with Bluehost. With their 30-day money-back guarantee, what do you got to lose? Head to Bluehost.com. That's BLUEHOST.com to start now.
On this episode, we cover the Joe Rogan Experience number 2246 with guest James Fox. The No Rogan Experience starts now. Welcome back to the show. This is a show where two podcasters with no previous Rogan experience get to know Joe Rogan. Joe Rogan is one of the most listened to people on the planet, whose interviews and opinions influence millions of people. He's regularly criticized for his views, often by people who've never actually listened to Rogan. So we listen, and where needed, we try to correct the record. It's a show for anyone who's curious about Joe Rogan, his guests, and their claims, as well as for anyone who just wants to understand Joe Rogan's ever-growing media influence. I'm Michael Marshall, and I'm joined by Cecil Cicerello, and today we're going to be covering Joe's December 24th, 2024 interview with James Fox. Cecil, how did Joe introduce James in the show?
Can I interject really quickly and just say that when you first texted me this episode, I thought it was Jamie Foxx. And so I was really excited. I was like, man, I like Jamie Foxx. That should be a very interesting. I know he sort of like did a recent special. And I thought he was plugging a special. No, it's a very different guy. This is James Fox, a UFO investigator and documentary filmmaker. His new film, The Program, is available to stream now. That's the Joe Rogan description of James Fox.
Yeah, I was way more excited when I realized it was this James Fox and not the other Jamie Foxx. I have to be completely honest. I was so much more excited. So, Cecil, is there anything else you've learned about James Fox that we might want to know?
You know, that's pretty much it. Like, most of him about him anywhere is his IMDb bio. So I'm going to read that. James Fox is a director and filmmaker specializing in UFO documentaries. Fox was the director, writer, and producer of the 2003 TV movie Out of the Blue, which explores UFOs and alleged cover-ups by governments. He wrote and directed the feature-length documentary The Phenomenon in 2020. Most recently, James Fox directed and appeared in Moment of Contact 2022, an exploration of events reported from Varginha, Brazil in 1966. I also want to mention before this episode starts in earnest that we are going to be using the term UAP and UFO interchangeably throughout, and they will too. This UFO was the standard that people used as a way to describe an unidentified flying object. The new acronym is UAP. UAP actually can have two meanings. It can stand for unidentified aerial phenomena and unidentified anomalous phenomenon, which could mean anything. But they both mean the same thing, but human brains have connected UFO to aliens so much that I think they wanted to get away from the UFO acronym because everybody just, as soon as they heard that word, thought, well, the aliens.
Yeah, exactly. Although now, obviously, what's going to happen is every time anybody hears UAP, that's going to be the thing for aliens instead. We're just going to move along. But it's fine.
I know.
You never run out of letters for acronyms. It's fine. There's lots of combinations out there that are possible.
Yeah, definitely. But, you know, it's still unidentified is the key piece, but we're going to keep on going back to it's aliens.
Yeah. Exactly. So, Cecil, this episode, unlike the other episodes that we've heard so far in our listening, this stays fairly on point throughout. It stays on subject. So what did they cover in this episode?
So they spend a lot of time talking about drones, the drone appearances that have suddenly stopped. They were for a while all over the place. You were hearing about them constantly in the U.S. in different places, Arizona and New Jersey being some of the most popular places. They're that sort of talk is mostly done now, but they were talking a lot about those drones that were appearing all over the country. They visit that topic throughout multiple times. It kind of comes back up in the conversation. They switch up and they begin talking about UAP sightings in the past. They tell multiple sort of mountain lion, bear, and skunk stories throughout. And then they shift conversation to talk about aliens living and moving underwater. They briefly mention the sub that imploded, the one that the billionaire built.
Yeah, the Titan one.
And then the Titan. And then they mention congressional hearings on UAPs. And my favorite part, and dear listeners, this is the greatest stuff that I've listened to in a long time. The pièce de résistance. They spend 15 minutes trying to get ChatGPT to admit that drones are real, and that the drones are controlled by either other worlds or they are part of a government secret program, and that UAPs are of otherworldly origin, and it is magic.
Yeah, they do. They really do that. So it looks like our work is going to be cut out for us. UFOs, that's what we're going to be covering. It's a lot to cover, so let's get started in our main event.
So to start out our UFO discussion, why don't we play a clip? This is a clip about a close encounter with an otherworldly being. Now, I want to warn people throughout this episode, James talks, and when he does, he backtracks quite a bit and clarifies certain points. He will say a number and then say, oh, maybe it was 16 or 17 or something. I cut a lot of that stuff out because it's really just filler, and there's not a lot to learn from certain things like that. I tried to keep his final number, the number he would say or something like that. But understand that I edited these clips down for brevity. I did not do it to try to edit out any of his words, to try to take anything out of context. You, of course, can listen to the entire episode and see if I am telling you the truth. But I hope that the listeners trust me that I did not try to edit this out to make him look worse. So here is the first clip.
3 days later, he's in a convoy, and it's early in the morning, and there's 3 Jeeps on a dirt road heading out in Ellis Test Range. And they see what looks like maybe somebody was involved in a plane crash, somebody that was struggling out in the middle of the desert. It was early in the morning. It was wintertime, and they're looking at this individual and like, oh my God, is that that person? That individual looks like they need some help. They look cold. Their skin had a slight blue tint to it, and they're looking at this gentleman and they're like, hey, stop the convoy. This person needs help, medical attention. Maybe they had a plane crash. They pull the convoy over, and as he's getting out, somebody in the truck screams, he's got no effing ears. And he had the same kind of uniform that they had on, but the uniform was just immaculate. Like there wasn't any dust on it. And he looks at him and he said his eyes were a lot bigger. And I starts talking to him in gibberish. But he said he started to understand, like telepathically, everything this person or entity, being, creature, alien, whatever you want to call it, was saying to him. And he was looking for some kind of metal. And he didn't know tantalum. You mean titanium? He's like, no, tantalum or something. And this conversation goes on for a bit, and then the guy just wanders back off and gets into that little craft that looked very similar to what you just saw there and flies away. And he sort of stair-stepped away, and everybody sort of came out of this comatose state, and off they went.
Any issues with this story, Marsh?
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously a fascinating story of something that would be, world-breaking and shattering, and epoch-shattering to reveal as true. But at the moment, all we've got is just the second or even third-hand reporting. We've got no evidence. He's just saying, take my word for it, take their word for it even, that this happened. This, I don't think, is strong enough to lead any kind of belief in aliens from. This is just a story that someone has told someone who's told him. Yeah,
it's like a game of telephone that we're hearing. Yeah. We're hearing this game of telephone. I also want to point out, too, man, we hear this all the time, that the aliens come down and they literally look just like us. They have, they're bipeds. They walk on 2 legs. In this case, this one had an immaculate uniform. So obviously it was somehow either able to like recreate the uniform or recreate in our minds an idea of what the uniform would look like perfectly, but yet it couldn't get the skin color or the eye size, and it neglected ears completely. It just thought, I'm gonna put it together a whole human, but oh man, I forgot the ears. Or maybe his buddy was borrowing the ears from the costume that day. Maybe he took the ears out of the costume beforehand. We're not sure. It just sounds like when people say this, I automatically think, I'm like, the reason why we see aliens the way we see aliens in movies is because it's so much more money to make an alien look not human than it is to just have a guy dressed up in a suit. And so our brains think an alien needs to look like us. Like, we were badly sort of put together through evolution to have bad backs and to need to have some sort of weird posture thing that makes us stand up straight, because we can't function very well after a long period of time standing on our two legs. We're really badly put together. So we have to presume that other places in the universe put together aliens in the exact same bad way that evolution put us together.
Yeah, exactly. Because the thing is, like, it's worth us saying up front, I don't know how you feel about this. I feel aliens probably exist. There's probably life somewhere. We can't know for sure, but the chances are, there might be a decent chance that there's life out there. If they do exist, they're very unlikely to be able to get here just because of the vast interstellar distances. If they did manage to get here, they almost definitely do not look like anything like we do. There's no reason they'd have the same physiology. Yeah. They wouldn't look like a regular guy whose eyes are slightly bigger and has no ears. That's just not what this is going to be down like. It's going to be much more like something we couldn't possibly imagine was alive. Is way more likely to be what we'd encounter. You look at even just life at the very like the deepest parts of the ocean where the pressures are incredibly high. We see stuff that does not look like the kind of things we would think were alive. That's the kind of mind-blowing stuff we would be expecting if we were actually meeting aliens.
Yeah, and I also want to point out too, in this economy, it's so sad that alien has to fly all the way here and ask for like handouts. Yeah. It's really tough. Like, you just got to stand there with your sign that says looking for tritium. And then you got that sign, a little bowl underneath it. It's tragic, really. You travel
like,
all
they're
those
20
distances.
pence short for their bus fare home. And it's like, come on, let's just give me the 20p of tritium.
Can I Venmo you the tritium? Is that a thing I can? All right. So the next clip this is going to be a series of clips that we're going to play that are all based on the same subject. Now, this is a clip that's introducing one of the players in this, and this is a person named Nick Pope. So we're going to play that clip now.
Well, I was going to tell you, there's a photograph of a jet circulating. Can I go into a little bit of detail? Because everyone's always worried about, like, where's the good evidence? Where's the good photograph?
Right. Show me that photograph again.
Yeah.
Now, this was a lost photograph that was recovered.
Okay, so I heard about this in the late 90s.
Tell everybody about it.
Okay, there was a guy, Nick Pope, who investigated, he was part of the UFO desk at the Ministry of Defense of England in the late 90s. I was interviewing him for a number of my films. I did a film called Out of the Blue, I Know What I Saw. Before I did The Phenomenon, I asked him, like, hey, man, you were a part of the UFO desk at the MOD. What was the best case you ever saw?
So what was the best case you ever saw?
Yeah, so we're going to talk about the Calvin UFO. Now, the thing is, they're talking about Nick Pope here. What's interesting about Nick Pope is a name, is someone who's very, very well known to UK skeptics. Like, he's given a lot of skeptics in the pub talks back before I got involved in organized skepticism 15 years ago. So he's been around for an awful long time. And the interesting thing is, he's absolutely right that Nick Pope was one of the people. I think he actually even arguably ran the UFO desk at the Ministry of Defense. And that's brought up as a really important, like, this is the guy, this is the UFO guy at the MOD. And what we'll see is this is going to be an argument from authority. We're going to explain what an argument from authority is a little bit later in the show when we get to our skeptical toolbox. But it sounds really impressive. This guy was the UFO desk at the MOD. But what you've got to bear in mind is the context of this is that wasn't a very prestigious position, because it meant that you answered the phone anytime anybody thought they saw anything that was like a UFO. And you're going to get a load of, like, crank calls. You get a lot of people who are just wrong about stuff, people misidentifying Mars or misidentifying the moon and all this other stuff. This wasn't the head of the MOD. This isn't a high-ranking position. This is, you take those calls because the MOD need to have that desk, because what if 1 in a million of those things someone had seen in the sky wasn't a misidentified balloon, but was actually like a Russian bomber or something? You're going to want to know that as a Ministry of Defense. You want to know what's in your airspace. So his job was to collect all of those reports and then sift to see if there was anything in any of them that was of military strategic importance. And the thing is, since he left that role, he actually has done quite a lot of touring and interviews in which I would say he's certainly given the impression that it was a much more prestigious and important position than it was. He hasn't talked about it like this was answering the phone when you get the person at 3 a.m. He's talked about it like it's a lot more. In sometimes given the impression that maybe there's some space there for aliens. Now, in my understanding, he doesn't normally say, and therefore that was aliens. He just doesn't rule the aliens bit out and leaves the space there for people to fill that in. So here is the mystery. Here is what was reported, and we couldn't explain it this way, ... You can fill in the gap on aliens. What's slightly surprising to me is that in James's sort of, when he shows anything to do with Nick Pope here, and I've seen other clips of stuff that James has done, when Nick Pope is talking to him, Nick Pope doesn't seem to mention to James other possibilities. Whereas a lot of the time when I've seen Nick Pope being interviewed, he'll say, well, it could be aliens, or it could be military technology, or it could be these things. When he's talking to James, or at least the bits of the interview that James shows, seem to be just the bits when Nick Pope is leaving the door open for aliens.
Right.
Now, maybe Nick was changing the way he presented things. Maybe he was, maybe James has done some creative editing to remove the bits where he offered the other possibilities. It's hard to know exactly what that is, but that's kind of the context on Nick Pope, I'd say.
You know, you have a guy whose entire career is based on not just the fact that things like UFOs, unidentified flying objects, are being reported, but there's also, this guy also mentions multiple times in this conversation close encounters of what he calls the third kind. So he's talking about people directly interacting with an alien species. So this is a guy, I think, who's, you know, we need to mention when people are invested in certain things. This guy is invested in this being something that it's not just weird phenomenon or gas in the sky or misidentifying Venus or a undisclosed military piece of hardware. It's something else from another planet, and he's invested in that answer being true. And so we've got to point that out whenever you get an opportunity. Also, they say this is the best that Nick had ever seen. If you see this photo, and we will post a link to a story that shows this photo, I don't think this photo is terribly convincing. Look at this photo. It feels like the Bigfoot footage of the guy in the monkey suit walking in the woods.
Yeah,
it doesn't feel like a big deal. It feels like a photo you could probably explain away.
Yeah, and the thing is, we will actually talk about this photo quite a lot. A lot of people have tried to explain it in lots of different ways. There's a lot of kind of research been done on it. No one's got to a definitive version of what this is yet. So it is probably the most convincing, or the most, the photo that is still the biggest question mark, I would say. Most stubborn. Still the biggest mystery in it, yeah.
All right, so this is the next clip. This is describing how this particular photo that we were just talking about was actually taken.
And he goes, oh man, 1990, Scotland, there were 2 poachers. It was late in the afternoon. They were in a place, I now know it's called Calvine. They came upon, in this relatively remote area, and they came upon this diamond-shaped or disc-shaped object that was quite large, that was hovering silently really close. I mean, close. And they were scared to death, and they were kind of hiding out underneath this tree, and they're looking at this thing. What the are we looking at? And one of them had a camera. Just as he was considering taking his camera out, a military jet came in, and it came out into the scene, and it flew all the way around the disc. And as it did so, the guy mustered up the courage, came out from under the tree, and he snapped 5 or 6 photographs of this object suspended in the air. So the disc is here, and the plane is flying around. It's click, 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 click.
So, yeah, this is the Calvin UFO photo. This is the photo that I actually already knew this story when I heard it on Rogan. I was already aware of it. We actually published to The Skeptic magazine that I'm the editor of an analysis of this photo, positing one potential version of what was going on here. So this is a story that I already knew. What is worth pointing out is we have the photo, which was recently unearthed. It was kind of reported for a long time, but no one had a picture of it. No one had seen the photo. But everything he's saying about the people were scared, that the thing was hovering silently, all this story around it isn't something you can tell from the photo. This is something that has to be sort of separate to the photo. So you could quite easily have this photo make up any story that you like around it. this is the story that has been circulated, but even if the photo was of something unusual, that doesn't mean that all the details of it that aren't in the photo, like the sound that it didn't make, those don't necessarily have to be real. But yeah, so this is a well-known at this point UFO case in the UK that I'd already seen, and people can look up on the Skeptic magazine for at least one couple of analyses of what this photo might be.
And that Skeptic magazine article opened my eyes in some ways. When I looked at it, I initially saw it and I didn't know what it was. It feels a little strange, but you're not sure what it is. It could be a hoax of some kind. It could be, something like a military something. You're not sure. But someone posited that the way it's framed, it looks like there's a sort of a tree branch that's sort of hanging down with some green leaves that are hanging down, sort of almost vine-like.
Yeah, and then you've got like a very sort of white, it's a very white background. You've got, at the very bottom of the picture, you've got a fence, so you can see there's a fence. It looks like we're lower down, we're looking through a fence up at the sky. There's a branch of a tree just in front of the camera towards us. And then in the at some point in the distance, you can see a sort of diamond-y-shaped kind of object in the sky, and then you do see a jet that's just below it that's kind of flying along. And that's all the detail we have in the picture.
Yeah.
There's even the cloud cover is fairly uniform. So it just does seem like you've got just a white background, the fence, the tree branch, and those two objects in the sky.
Yeah. And those two objects, when someone pointed this out, and I hadn't really shifted my perspective, but they said, like, if you look at it, it might also be a reflection in the water. So what we're seeing might be the water, something that's in the water that's reflecting the two sides to make a diamond shape, and then something that's in the water to make it look like there's a Harrier jet. It's reflecting of the wing.
Yeah, or even more to that, it's for me, when I looked at that picture and saw the reflection explanation of it, it looked like the reason it's a diamond shape is that you've got a triangular object above the surface of the water that's reflecting back and therefore forming the other half of the triangle. And then the jet could actually have been a genuine jet just flying overhead and caught in the reflection.
Oh, interesting.
Which is why it looks so much like a jet. Now, that's one explanation. Other people have analyzed this, and they've said there are reasons to not accept the reflection, that looking at the rock, the reflection doesn't quite work, and maybe that's true. It's one of the reasons this is still an open conversation. But that is one of the explanations there. It's a better explanation for me than aliens, but it is a flawed explanation for some of the analyses that's been done. Also, this idea of like the witness, he says he steps out, he takes 6 pictures, click, 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 click. Only one of those pictures has ever surfaced. So the idea that there were 6 pictures comes from the witnesses who received the 6 pictures, so the people at the newspaper, the people at the RAF, but we have never seen what those other 6 pictures are. So when he says a jet came along and flew all the way around, that is what has been reported. But for me, I don't know how you could disambiguate that from, say, you took 6 pictures of a jet doing a fly past, but then showed those pictures out, looked at those pictures out of order, and it would look like the jet is moving around. And this is actually not too far from an RAF base. So it may even be that there were jets doing a fly past as a military training exercise where multiple jets went past. And so in each of those 6 pictures, it may not be the same jet. So there is another possibility there. Without seeing the other pictures to see the jet turned back around and circling it, we can't be sure that that's what the pictures actually represent at all.
And it could also be, too, if it's by an Air Force base, it could also be that there's some sort of technology, a stealth sort of technology or something that they don't want people to know about, that they was flying overhead that day. And they took a photo of a thing that happened to be flying up overhead that they don't want people to know about because it's a secret technology. And that's also a possibility.
Yeah, absolutely. Park that for a second. We will come back to that after this next clip.
All right. Well, let's get to the next clip then. This one is a little long. I kept it intentionally long because I wanted to let him tell the story of how this was discovered and then allegedly covered up.
And the reason why I know this is because the individual who kept one of the prints, thank you very much, Craig Lindsay, RAF press officer, and thank you, David Clark, for uncovering this, because it's the most amazing picture ever. So they go to the local newspaper, and they were like, hey, man, we just filmed something in the sky. We got 6 prints of it. It was 35 millimeter film footage, right? And they're going to go public with their story. 2 witnesses, broad daylight, a UFO, points of reference with a military jet flying around, 5 or 6 prints. That's pretty solid evidence, right? The local newspaper was like, they're about to go public with it, print the story, and they were like, well, we need a statement from the RAF. So they contact the press officer, Craig Lindsay, and they were like, hey, what do you make of this UFO these guys took? And Craig Lindsay goes, I don't know what you're talking about. I haven't seen the picture. You haven't seen it? Well, let me send you a print. This is the newspaper. Sends him a print, big print like this. It was the one you see today. And he's like, holy shit, the hell is this? So he was like, this is crazy. So he takes a color Xeroxing machine and he sends it to the MOD in London, and he says, hey, there's a case that you might want to check, you might want to look into. He said he went from the office where the Xerox machine was, and before he can get back to his office, his phone was ringing off the hook, MOD. And the MOD basically stepped in, took over the investigation. They said, you can step down to Craig Lindsay. He steps down. He keeps the print, right? They take over. Witnesses gone. 5 or 6 prints gone. Story killed. And so I flew to England. I met with David Clark and his crew, the people that did the analysis work. Then I went up to Scotland. I met with Craig Lindsay, the RF press officer, gave me the first and only on-camera interview about it.
So I was excited listening to this clip, I have to say. I mean, first of all, that is a really solid story.
It's a solid story.
Two witnesses, broad daylight, you got photos, all of that is great, except we don't know who those witnesses are. Those witnesses, James hasn't spoken to those two witnesses. Those two witnesses haven't stepped forward at any point. We only have the second or third hand reports of the people who say they met those witnesses. And we have those reports several decades on as well. So people's memories can change and things can sort of change along the way. We can't see all the evidence. We only have one photo. We don't have the other photos that are out there. So all of this sort of, the amount of importance we can place on all of those extra bits has to be lower because we haven't got access to that. We just have to take their word for it. But the thing that really excited me about it was when David Clark's name came up, because I actually know David Clark reasonably well. Dave Clark is a professor of journalism and folklore at Sheffield Hallam University.
Oh.
Who hired me to do some journalism lecturing for his undergrads. So
interesting.
For several years, I would go and do lessons for Dave's journalism classes about journalism. So I actually know reasonably well. So because I know him reasonably well, I actually asked him about this case because David is the guy who uncovered the Calvin UFO picture that had hitherto gone unknown for 30 years as just kind of a legend. So I asked him about this, about what he thinks this was all about. He actually gave me a quote that I can use. He said, he was of the opinion in 2008, 2009 that this was actually just a hoax, that this thing was a deliberate hoax. But he's changed his mind since then. He thinks it's more likely to show some kind of military exercise because this photo was taken 2 days after Saddam Hussein invaded Saddam Hussein in Iraq. Yeah, so the Saddam Hussein was in Iraq. Yeah, absolutely. And so he actually had some military and intelligence contacts to talk about it. They said they don't think it's a hoax. These photos did actually make their way all the way to the Pentagon. Copies of these photos did go to the Pentagon, apparently, according to his contacts. And according to them and in his opinion, he thinks it's likely there's a secret prototype platform that was being tested, possibly off target, that was based at a local RAF base at the time. So that is Dave's opinion of this. I don't know how I feel about that personally. That's sort of how he's seeing it. I don't know if I fully buy the military tech thing because if this is 1994, so this is 30 years ago now. I'd ask the question as to where that technology's gone. If this was a drone, okay, maybe it was a drone technology, but do we have a lot of stuff that looks like that? I don't know. But certainly this is kind of where Dave's leaning. So Dave himself, despite being cited by James as the authority here who have uncovered all of this, doesn't think this is aliens. He thinks that if this is anything, it's either a hoax or it's military tech.
Is he a particularly rich man? Did he get paid off by the RAF to say this story? Is that...
Not that I'm aware of. I mean, he still works for Sheffield Hallam University and as a working academic.
Maybe he's doing that for the love of the game, Marsh. Who knows, right?
It is quite possible.
Yeah. I want to say, too, this is a something that happens with these sightings, and we're going to talk about it, too, with the drones when we get into it later. A lot of things happen to be filmed by bases, by especially Air Force bases. And I know that the UFO people who are true believers are going to say something like, well, yeah, that's because the aliens are coming down and they want to check out what we can do and our capabilities. Or, the more obvious option is you see something strange in the sky that you've never seen. It might be something that, one, you're probably not used to seeing certain planes or certain types of technology or certain configurations of lights in the sky. And that may trigger your thinking to think that it's something else. But this is happening around a place where there is stuff flying in the sky routinely. And so we have this weird thing where we're like, well, there's stuff flying in the sky there routinely. It must be from an otherworldly source, instead of saying there's stuff flying flying from this in the sky routinely. Maybe it's something that the government doesn't want us to know, or even if they do, don't care that it is. You just don't recognize it as something that's mundane.
Yeah, exactly. And for me, this is still a really cool picture. It's still a really cool story. But for me, the thing that's really cool about this is that this was almost like it had a legend status amongst ufologists and folklorists for 30 years now. But Dave Clark being interested in this story long enough, the way he got to this picture was because he found one of the documents that had been redacted when it had been sort of reported to the MOD. I think it was even through Freedom of Information, or when they released for the MOD's files, the UFO files. He went through these, and he noticed in the redaction that while they'd redacted the name of the officer at the RAF who was this reported to, they hadn't redacted his position or where he was based, and so he managed to go in through that way to say, well, who was based there at that time, and found Craig Lindsay and drove up to Scotland to meet Craig Lindsay. And Craig was like, oh yeah, I kept a copy of it. It's just in my garage, basically. And so he managed to uncover this story that had been buried for 30 years.
Amazing.
Not because it was buried by the system silencing it. It's just because Craig Lindsay didn't think it was that big a deal and had it in a box somewhere. And Dave managed to find it. That's the really cool thing about this. Not that this is the most convincing, compelling evidence of alien life that you'll ever see, because it's just not that.
This is continuing on with that same piece. Now, this is the guest trying to follow the lead, and he's going to use a lot of journalism language here. So we're going to lean on you a little, Marsh.
What astonished him about it, the analysis work they did on it, what the witnesses said, but we didn't have the witnesses. The people that took the photograph. We didn't have them, but I was going to report on this anyway, just because, wow, this is the picture that we've all been waiting for. This picture is phenomenal. But if you don't have provenance and you don't have the background story on it, it could be AI, it could be it could be a hoax. Some people call it a reflection, not a hoax. So
he's definitively not a reflection. I retract. Sorry, James. I apologize. It's not a reflection.
Well, I think I think at one point he even says he knows it's not a reflection because he's been to the exact spot where the picture was taken. And that I don't think that can be true necessarily, because I don't think we know exactly where it was taken. But he says that he confidently rules out that it's not a hoax. It's not a hoax. But he's citing Dave Clark. Now, David Clark doesn't think you can definitively point out that this isn't a hoax. He was actually leaning towards hoax for a long time. So James seems more certain of the inability of this to be a hoax than the person who found this picture and researched this picture. But he's talking about provenance, and provenance is really, really important, because if you can't establish how was this photo taken, who was it taken by, can I meet the person who took it, can they tell me that where they took it, and whose hands has this photo been through, you can't tell whether anything has been done to this photo or whether its origin story is true. If you can't meet the person who took it and have them say it was silent, then the reports of the thing in the air being silent are sort of useless, because you can't tell that from the photo. So provenance is really, really important there. And so, like I said, I asked Dave Clark about this. He analysed this. He also analysed this with his colleague Andrew Robinson at Sheffield Hallam University's folklore department. So Dave said of those options, he says, as for the theories about the photo, he said the three most popular are that it's a reflection of a mountain sticking up through the mist, that it's a rock sitting up out of the lock of the pond, or that it's a dangling Christmas ornament. But he's not actually convinced by any of those. Now, for a while, when he would give lectures about this picture and about how to fake UFO pictures, he would actually get people to hold up a Christmas ornament, like a diamond-shaped Christmas ornament, on fishing wire, so it was basically invisible. And you could get it to dangle in a way that would replicate this picture. One of the problems is it's much harder to do that if you have 6 photos in a row where other things are moving around and this isn't. But we don't have that. We only have word that those pictures exist. So we can only take that so seriously until we see those 5 other pictures. But yes, and if you look up Andrew Robinson at Sheffield Hallam, he's done a load of analysis of these pictures, putting forward each of these hypotheses and testing them. It's really, really interesting stuff. They don't come to aliens as a conclusion, though.
All right, I'm going to play this. This is the next big break in the story for James.
I'm ending production of the program, and I get a text from David Clark, and he goes, something big's about to happen. And I said, what? He goes, just sit tight. I can't go public right now, but something big's going to happen.
Okay, I just want to jump in real quick and just say that's a weird text to get from somebody that says, hey, something big's going to happen, but I can't tell you about it. Like, that's really very strange.
Yeah, you say that, but I know David Clark, and it's not that strange. That's perfectly fine. But But
does he
also-
send you suspenseful texts all the time, or what is happening?
The thing to bear in mind, right? The thing that will explain that is Dave Clark is a journalist as well. Like he was a journalist at the Sheffield local Sheffield newspaper for a long, long time. He is a folklorist journalist now. If he's found something big out, he's not going to give it James Fox first before he publishes it himself. It's his exclusive. He's got the information. So like you can say, sit tight, I'm going to get my story out and then I'll tell you. But you don't want to give it to James first because James might blow your exclusive.
Yeah, that's very true. That's very true. I'm not thinking of it like that. I'm thinking of it like a person who's texting with a friend. And I couldn't imagine sending one of my friends a text and be like, something big's about to happen, but I'm not going to tell you what.
I mean, I work in this field. I do that quite often. There's like, I've got a big thing coming up and you'll care about it, but I can't tell you until it's published.
Okay, all right. Let's continue on with the clip.
So long story short, this guy, Richard Greaves, who was one of the hotel cooks, worked in the kitchen with the photographers, with the two witnesses that took the photograph. And Richard Greaves came forward on print. When I contacted David Clark, I was like, hey, can you get me an interview with this guy? And then probably about 10 o'clock that night, I'm in the edit room buttoning the film up, and all of a sudden I get a phone call, and he's like, I've just come out the pub, I'm ready to go. I was like, okay, grab a camera, roll it, let's record this. And he reveals that he knew the witnesses. He worked with them in the kitchen. He gave all the specifics. He provided their names. And then he said 2 or 3 nights, 4 nights after they took that photograph, they were all on a cigarette break at the hotel, early evening, pissing rain. He said a car rolled up. There were 3 guys in it, a driver and 2 men in suits in the back. They roll up. They come out. They say cigarette break's over. They pull the 2 witnesses aside, and they grill him, and you got to hear it directly from the horse's mouth. Richard Greaves said that when they were all, the people that were not involved with the incident were told to go back inside the hotel, which they did, but they looked through the window and they saw in the pissing rain, he said they were out there for 10 or 15 minutes in the pissing rain, and that these guys, they came back inside and they were white as a, he said, he literally goes, they came back inside. They were white as a fucking ghost, and which we all get a good laugh out of. But and then they started drinking heavily, and within a couple of weeks, they vanished without a trace, and they've been gone ever since.
Yeah, I mean, a couple of things here. The fact that he keeps emphasizing that it was pissing rain tells me that he's a man who's not spent a lot of time in Scotland. Like, there's going to be pissing rain. Like, them standing outside for 10 minutes in the pissing rain is not that unusual. Yeah. It's just the climate there, mate. It's fine.
Yeah.
But his argument is like, well, the absence of witnesses, the fact that the witnesses disappeared and we can't verify their story with them in any way, that just makes this whole story stronger. You should definitely believe it because we don't know who they are and we can't find them. He says that he's got the witnesses' names. That's remarkable. He doesn't use them. He doesn't tell us them. That would be a pretty useful thing. Like if he said the people who took the photo were called this and this, for a start, it would give other people something to work with to try and track them down. It's really weird that he doesn't. He tells us Richard Graves' name. He tells us like other names of people involved, Craig Lindsay involved, but he doesn't tell us the names of the people who took the photo, which is a really important detail.
Sure,
I think that's an unusual thing to leave out personally. At the moment we've got the photo without getting those witnesses. Even this guy is just a guy who says that he knew them 30 years ago. He's willing to say now that he knew them 30 years ago. That's what we've got to go on. This isn't making the story stronger.
Yeah, and it's a guy who also just got out of the pub. I don't know. I feels like an important piece of this story is that this guy just got out of the pub. I also want to say, too, one of the major pieces of the story is that these guys vanished without a trace. That genuinely feels like way more interesting information than 2 guys might have taken a photo of a UFO. I think that if they vanished without a trace for real, but what really happened was they quit and he just lost contact with them. That's what you really mean to say. But by saying vanished without a trace, you're able to say, like, it makes it sound like the men in black that came to visit you that totally told you not to talk about this might have kidnapped these guys a few days later. At least that's how it sounds to me. It sounds like he's implying that they vanished without a trace because of this.
Yeah, I agree. That's definitely, it feels like what he's implying. And there's lots of other ways we could explain this. But he might just be like, if I get involved in this story from 30 years ago, I get to be in an American movie. So I'm going to talk about what I think happened, and I'm going to say a lot of things, and maybe some of those things will make the movie, and other things won't make the movie. Like, there's lots of ways that this could come to, and it doesn't all have to be that Will Smith turned up with his flashy device and made the 2 people disappear.
All right, so now I want to move to talk about the drones because they spend a lot of time talking about drones in this very specifically. And I want to play 2 very specific clips of Joe and James talking about drones, and these are the drones that are coming in over New Jersey.
I want to get back to what I was talking about earlier. Logistically,
no,
if you're letting something go from the ocean,
yes,
if you're flying it out of the ocean, logistically, you would have to have some sort of a large craft out there that's going to house these things, or it's going to launch from, right?
Yeah.
If it is actually coming from the ocean.
Oh, you see, the drones you're talking about right now.
Right.
Yes.
So either they're ours, and if there are ours, how do they hide the fact that there's a battleship out there? Is that possible? And if it's from a submarine, how do they develop a submarine that can launch 50 car-sized or SUV-sized drones from?
Joe strikes me as somebody who is curious, but not curious enough to do another step. Like he almost always seems to ask an interesting question, but then he fails to bother to look for the next piece. And this is one of those examples. First, the rumor he's basing this off of is a rumor started by one police officer who said that he saw 50 drones. No one took video of it. No one took photos of it. There's not any images. You can't find this anywhere. At least I wasn't able to. Happy to hear a listener. If you found a story that happens to show video or has a photo, I'm happy to look at it. But I will say I couldn't find it in my ability to search through news articles. Could not find
and by
it.
50 drones, again, these will have been taken at night. So he means 50 lights. Like he didn't see the 50 units themselves. He saw the lights from 50 drones, which could easily be something much bigger than that with several lights on it, or a plane, that type of stuff. That's what has been misidentified along the way. Yeah. Yeah.
And also, too, we're talking about an SUV-sized drone, which, again, no one has taken a photo of that we can see that it is that actual size. Like, there's not one parked next to an SUV in an AMP parking lot that you can be like, oh, this is exactly the same size as an SUV. It's what people have been reporting. But we know that human depth perception is really not very great at great distances. We can't tell. That's why things like forced perspective in movies tricks our brains all the time into thinking things are closer or farther away than they are, and bigger and smaller, therefore.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially when you're looking up at the sky. Because if you're looking along the ground, you could see, well, that thing there is about the same size as that
points of reference.
You've got something to refer. Up in the sky, you've only got like looking up into the infinity of beyond. I mean, if a balloon that you held on a string would look bigger than the sun to you, it doesn't mean that it is. It's just a question of perspective. So you can't easily judge how big things are in the sky, and people make these mistakes all the time. It's why they occasionally will misreport that they saw a UFO and it turns out it was the moon. They just weren't quite used to looking at it in a certain angle or through certain cloud cover, that type of stuff.
I was walking through downtown Chicago one time, and as I'm walking, I look and I see a guy, and he's looking up at the sky kind of off into the distance. And then another guy walks up and looks up in the sky off into the distance. And we all kind of congregate. There's like 3 or 4 of us all start to come together. And we all start looking, and we're wondering what the hell is flying in the sky. And it's flying erratically, and it's red, and it's daytime, and it's moving really erratically, and it's moving very quickly across around these buildings. And at first, all of us thought it was a drone. We're like, is that a drone? But it was moving up and kind of at an angle in ways that we didn't think a drone could move, and it was very strange. And then finally someone says, oh, it's a balloon. And it was one of those Mylar balloons that someone had let go. And once you saw it, you're like, oh, of course, it's a balloon. But it stopped 4 of us on the street as we're walking in downtown Chicago on our busy days to look at something, to be like, holy crap, what is that? And there's a moment where your brain starts trying to figure out, you can't tell how big it is because you can't tell how far away things are. Even with buildings as references, you don't know how close it is versus that building. You can see the building, you can see it. It's sometimes it's difficult to tell. And so, like, I've even been involved in things where I couldn't identify immediately, and that happens. I mean, but I think, like, more often than not, the answer is there. We just gave up before we got there.
Yeah, I agree. And we'll come back to the SUV in a second, but this reminds me of something a point that I wanted to make, in that when it comes to, you say that the answer is often there. Sometimes it's not an answer, it's a range of answers. Because if you have, let's say you have 10 reports of something in the sky, you'd be like, well, this report said that it was lights. This report that it said that it moved in a certain way. This report said that it disappeared in this kind of way. How can you explain something that could do all of that? It's like, well, maybe the first one was a plane and the second one was a balloon and the third one was something else. Like, you don't need an explanation that covers all these different attributes, because you're actually looking at lots of different things. You're just looking at them all with the same mentality of thing in the sky might be a UFO. How do I fit all these bits together? You get the same thing with like reports of cryptozoology. Like, well, they said it was like it had the body of a dog, but then it had like paws and it could pick stuff up. And it's like, yeah, 9 of those reports were dogs, and the 10th was a raccoon. But like, if you try and make the same answer fit all 10 reports, it's not going to work because they weren't all 10 the same things. And that's what's happening with these lights and drones and stuff.
Last thing I want to mention too is that he cannot imagine that there could be a sub out there or a battleship that could hold these things. Routinely, if let's presume that Joe is true, that what Joe is saying is true, is that there are 50 SUV-sized drones. I don't think that's the case, but let's just presume that's true. That off the ocean come 50 SUV-sized drones, and he's incredulous, thinking there's no way that we could have technology that could allow this. But you know, an aircraft carrier can carry routinely 60 aircraft, and we're talking jets. These are big, way bigger than an SUV. So you could easily fit something like that. Even a sub, a nuclear capable sub, could have tubes that could release these things. These subs will carry 20 Trident missiles. So 20 Trident missiles, they're 44 feet long a piece. You could easily fit probably 60 drones in missile compartments that they could easily blast off and fly off. I'm not saying that's happening, but I am saying like Joe didn't even bother to do a next step, which could say that, well, this almost certainly is something that the U.S. military could probably do without a lot of real heavy lifting. It seems like they could probably do something like that pretty easily. I don't think it's happening, but Joe doesn't even bother to take that next step.
Yeah, it's those kind of key skeptical questions. Of the first question should always be, is this thing even true? Before we start to try and explain it, first try and figure out if it's true. And if it is true, can we explain it through some fairly mundane ways first? And if none of the mundane ways fit, then we can start looking at the extraordinary. But like, we need to first rule out the bog standard stuff and work through a sequence of less likely things along the way, rather than jumping straight to, therefore it's aliens or anything like that.
Yeah. Or it's some super secret tech that nobody knows.
Yeah.
All right, we're going to play this next clip. This is sort of trying to explain the drone activity.
Why would they do that over residential areas? Why would they have everybody scratching their heads? All these press conferences. You're talking about the head of the gang of 8, right?
But if they need to patrol those guys,
you're not going to tell
if they are really looking for a nuke. Okay, let's imagine that this story about a Ukrainian nuke from the time when they disarmed them, there's one that's unaccounted for. This is one of those stories that's been on the internet. I don't know if it's true.
Bad Joe, no cookie. I'm going to continue the clip.
Yeah,
that it's unaccounted for, and that they think it's headed to the United States. If you were trying to find that thing.
Like a dirty bomb?
Yeah, or like just a regular nuke, that if you're looking for gamma rays, you could devise a drone that could search for that, and you'd fly it over an area, and you wouldn't care whether people freaked out, because it's more important to find this goddamn thing.
Joe, you're not talking about gamma rays, by the way. Gamma rays are harder
I did wonder
to detect.
about the gamma rays.
Gamma rays are harder to detect than what you're suggesting. But, you don't need an SUV-sized drone to outfit let's say a Geiger counter. You wouldn't need an SUV-sized drone to do that. I'm not saying that that's what they're doing. This whole thing about the sort of radioactive material was blown up because they said that there was a cargo container that wound up missing some sort of radioactive material. Now, this isn't radioactive material to make an actual nuclear device. This is material that you would use if there was something like a dirty bomb. It was from like an MRI machine, right? So it's missing from some sort of machine, a medical machine, and the machine itself was missing. They found it. Everything's found. Everything was found, and it was found within moments. But for some reason, the correction doesn't get to these people who want to make a claim that the reason why we see these drones is because there's some sort of radioactive material that they're sniffing out. And that's what we should alarm the entire populace about this, because that's what they're really doing, instead of maybe occasionally people are looking up into the sky and they're seeing stuff that they're not used to seeing.
Yeah, and I think right after this, Joe even says, he says something like, it almost seems too sexy that the United States have this kind of ability to fly these things around to look for drones, look for nukes. It almost seems too sexy. And it's like, if it seems too sexy, Joe, maybe that's not what's happening. Like, I know that you want that to be true because we all want the extraordinary thing to be true. I totally get that instinct. But whenever we're pulled towards an explanation that when we hear it, we can say, well, that seems a bit too filmic. I think he even says it's like in a film or something. That should be a red flag for us to question it. If it requires that level of elaborate explanation, that would be like a Hollywood film worth of explanation, a Hollywood film plot. That may be a sign that we should be looking for something standard before we move on to the extraordinary.
This is the last clip in the UFO section. This is just talking about evidence for UFOs.
There's no smoke without fire. There is so much evidence in terms of eyewitness testimony and radar, some photographic, not as much as we'd like, that something truly inexplicable is taking place in our airspace, right?
For sure.
Something that, after careful examination, something that, not because of a lack of data in some instances, but that after careful analysis and research, investigation, that comes out the other end and says, I can't explain this. This is going to have to be one of those unknowns, or, falls into that 15% category of cannot provide a terrestrial or conventional explanation for. And those are the cases that I've so desperately have been going after for a long time.
There's no smoke without fire, Marsh.
Yeah, I liked him saying this because the thing is, there is smoke without fire. Sometimes people see steam and they mistake it for smoke. Other times people see smoke and they don't realize that there's a smoke machine there. So there isn't a fire, it's just a smoke machine. Sometimes it's just foggy or the lighting's poor and you can't quite tell. Like, my point is, people misidentify things all the time. That's what's happening with UFOs as well.
Right.
It's not the smoke and the fire. It's not the fire causing the smoke. It's misidentifying an airplane or the moon or a reflection or all these kind of other stuff. And he says those ones that they can't, the 15% that they can't provide a conventional explanation for. I'm not sure the number's as high as 15%, but let's give him the 15%. The fact that you can't provide a conventional explanation doesn't mean that you therefore have to accept an unconventional explanation, because it just might be that there is a conventional explanation that you can't find. Right. And to give an example of that, just a random example, I thought about this. I found a random photo of a Chicago street from the year 2015. Okay, I've put it in the link for you to see there, Cecil.
Yeah.
It's just of a regular street. It's not worth the listeners seeing it. But at one point, there is a lady walking in front of the cab. Now, I could say, if you can't tell me the name of that lady, you can't give me a conventional explanation for who she is, well, she must be a ghost then. It's a 10-year-old photo. Tell me who that lady is right now. And if you can't give me her name and address and social security number, then the only other explanation is she's a ghost. Well, no, she was just a lady, but maybe the distance at the time that has passed has made it hard for you to get to the conventional explanation. But there still is one, and we shouldn't believe she's a ghost just because we can't figure out exactly who she is right now easily.
Another thing we do too is we don't look up in the sky very often. And I think that's one of the things that gets missed all the time is that, people don't look up often. And when they do, they see these things that are up in the sky. But a lot of times these things, they have FAA lights on them. It's not like they're not flying around with the lights that are required for aircraft to fly around in the sky. They are flying around with those lights on, and we see those lights and they fly across the sky, and maybe they move in a way that we're not used to, but maybe it's because we're not used to how quick planes move when they're nearby or farther away. We're not used to that sort of thing. We don't spend a lot of time staring up at the sky and paying attention to these things. And we might not know what a drone looks like when it moves. And we might not know what a plane looks like when it moves. And a lot of things get misreported. And if we just pretend that everything gets reported should be investigated as if it's some sort of crazy phenomenon, you also have to just wipe out all these very mundane reasons why something could be flying around, especially near an airbase. It doesn't, use Occam's razor. You can tell that a lot of the stuff that gets reported, this stuff is all just really mundane stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. We don't look up a lot. And also, a lot of this stuff that you see, you're not the one looking up at it. You're seeing a video of it. And there's actually a really interesting thing that Joe mentions in the middle of this. I think we show a video of a light in the sky moving around really quickly. It's zipping about really rapidly. And Joe says, oh, is this video zoomed in? And it is zoomed in. And what's happening is when you zoom in, you're trying to keep that object in frame. But any amount of movement when you're zoomed in, that object is going to move in the frame quite quickly. The object's staying still. It's the frame that's moving, but you can't tell that without frames of reference. And so a lot of these kind of zipping around things are actually just the camera is moving as you're trying to track it, not the object moving very quickly. But it makes it look in the video that the object is doing remarkable things. For anyone who's interested in some of the explanations behind these drones or behind some of those UFO things, I have to give a shout out for the work of Mick West, who from the website Metabunk, he writes for Skeptical Inquirer. He puts out videos. He's been interviewed a lot about some of these drone pictures, and he actually does a great job of actually tracking down what each of these things were. And some of that is by looking on airplane trackers to say, well, what time was this specific video taken? If I go onto an airplane tracker for that location, you can go online and put in the details of the location at the time, and you'll find out whether a plane was flying overhead at the time. Yeah. And you can actually track it down to specific planes. So yeah, Mick West's work on this is absolutely amazing if you want to know what's really going on.
Yeah, it was Elon Musk's private jet every time. That's what we saw. All right, well, we've talked a lot about UFOs, but we really want to talk very specifically about something that UFO proponents use very often, and that's a very specific argument. We're going to get to that in our Toolbox segment.
Wow. So that's the tool bag, and something just fell out of the tool bag?
We hear a lot that there is someone who knows something. It is an argument from authority. We hear from these people that there is someone, a high up someone who knows something, and they are giving us this information. Marsh, why should we be a little skeptical when we hear that?
Yeah, so the argument from authority, logical fallacy, is essentially when someone is expecting you to believe what they're saying based on the strength of their reputation rather than the strength of their evidence. So this is right because this person is an expert and he says so. This is right because my God has told me it. This is right because this general wouldn't lie about these things. That is all just a way of like distracting you at times, or it can be used as a way of distracting you from the actual evidence that's being put forward. If the evidence isn't great, if the logic of the evidence isn't great, if all that stuff doesn't work, it doesn't matter who's saying it or not.
All right, so let's listen to the argument from authority. We have a couple clips to illustrate it. The first example here is talking about a UFO crash that happened in Brazil.
I've been working with this guy. We've been communicating on Signal for a long time. Actually, he was through Proton. He was emailing me stuff about Virginia, the UFO crash in Virginia. Mm-hmm. And but he was anonymous. One day, I was like, he's really knowledgeable. And he was sending me stuff that was really helpful. Like, you should track down this flight because if it happened, it was going out of this airport, go to this base. And I was like, finally one day, I was like, who are you? And how do you know what you know? He goes, I'm a retired United States Air Force colonel. I was like, oh. And he goes, and I'm also an experiencer. I had an experience back in 1980, blah, blah, blah.
Oh, so what happened to him?
He had a UFO encounter. It's in the movie.
So what we have here is this person, he has to be more informed. His opinions on UFOs are more important because he's a retired Air Force colonel. I mean, he's retired, so like he's not going to be fully au fait with exactly what's happening right now. But the fact that he's had that position, that's why we should believe him. Even though he also says that he's experienced alien abductions, which for me would like remove a little bit of his credibility because there is no good evidence for alien abductions. So we already know he's got an investment in the alien hypothesis. The fact that he's a colonel doesn't mean that his opinions on aliens are any more likely to be correct. But it's very much being presented as if that's the case.
Yeah, his eyes work just like all the rest of our eyes work. It's not like he has special eyes because he's a colonel. He has the same eyes, and his brain plays the same tricks on him that everybody else gets their tricks played on them. So it's not like he has any sort of special thing that makes him different.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's even a thing that goes around when it comes to UFO stories where pilots will see something and they will say things like, well, pilots are trained observers. They're trained to be able to observe things. And that makes it sound like they are better at understanding everything that they see better than we would be. But where they're trained to observe stuff, they're not trained to observe aliens. They're trained to look out for other things that are relevant to their job. So they can be they can have a hyper agency detection where they're always looking for, well, this anomaly has to be something significant because it can't be something insignificant because I'm trained to look out for significant things in case it's something really significant. So it can actually work against you, that kind of idea of being a trained observer and being always alert for something anomalous. you can rule out stuff that is just kind of mundane but unexpected.
Next example here, this is talking about a person named James Sands.
We have the names of the other military witnesses that were on duty during the encounter, the alleged encounter. People are going to criticize me because I'm reporting on a close encounter of the third kind. But this, Jason Sands says he's willing to do a lie detector test like public. He's willing to testify under oath that everything he's saying is true. We have a date, we have a location, and we have the names of the other on-duty officers. So what I'm hoping is, despite the level of criticism I'm going to receive for reporting on this, is that other individuals that have more information on this are going to be inclined to come forward. I also met with people in the Senate Armed Service Committee, Senate Select Committee on Intelligence, in the House, and they said Jason Sands is who he says he is. He checks out. He is named previously classified programs. He's identified. The guy's legit. His credentials check out, and so I opted to go ahead and report on it with the hope that more information will come out on it.
Listen, man, there's nothing wrong with reporting on a story like that. There's been a bunch of them. It's not a small number of these things where people have experienced these things. Yeah. And imagine if it's true.
If it's true,
they're not all liars. I can't believe they're all liars.
It's hard to imagine.
Imagine being that person who had that experience and not have anybody believe you. Not only that, but it can actually ruin your reputation and your career to talk about this experience.
So yeah, we have here Jason Sands. He's military, and we should believe him because he is who he says he is. His credentials check out. Well, he isn't credentialed for being able to identify aliens. We don't have a credential for that.
Yeah.
So there are no credentials that would give us. The fact that he is who nobody is denying, to my knowledge, nobody needs to deny that Jason Sands is who he says he is. We can accept that. We don't have to question that. But we also don't then have to accept that he's absolutely right about close encounters of the third kind. That's a different step, and you don't have the credentials or the expertise to make that leap unless you've got the evidence.
And also, too, they go to great lengths to tell you that he's willing to take a lie detector test. Well, lie detector tests are nothing. That's a nothing. That's not doing anything. That's hooking you up to something and paying attention to some vital statistics on your body, and then no one is able to tell whether or not that you are telling the truth or not telling the truth. Those things don't work. They don't. You can't reliably tell whether or not someone is lying. Yeah. So it's not any. You might as well wear a mood ring and answer questions. It's the same thing. There's nothing there. That doesn't mean he's telling the truth. It just means he's willing to take a faulty test. That's all it means.
Yeah, and he could be telling his truth but still be wrong. Like Joe says, they aren't all liars, and I agree. They're not all liars. Lots of them are just wrong.
Yeah.
Lots of people who think that they've seen aliens have misidentified a plane in the sky or have misremembered a certain detail or have fallen for a hoax or have had an experience where they have seen something that wasn't necessarily there. We know that that's a thing that can happen. People can have hallucinations and waking dreams and all these different things. These are all very mundane explanations that don't require you to be a liar, but also don't require you to be correct about having encountered aliens.
This is the third example of argument from authority. This is talking about David Grush.
And again, I've said this earlier in the show, and I'll say it again, is like the reason why I believe David Grush, who testified, not just because
I believe David, but David doesn't have firsthand experience that he's talked about.
But the reason, I know, but the reason why I believe him is because it aligns with my research in the field.
Good for you, Joe.
Yeah, it's great that Joe pushes back that this isn't like, I can believe him, but he doesn't have first-hand experience. He's not got the experience. He's not got the evidence. You're believing him, like James is believing him, because it aligns with what James already
confirmation
thinks.
Bias, friend.
That's exactly it. That's exactly it. And so he's taken David's word on it. He trusts David. He's got David's reputation matters. David's, I think he even says that David himself has like military background and stuff. And David's, we can take it on his authority because it also agrees with what I think. Even though he doesn't have the experience or the evidence himself, we should be asking for the evidence.
I want to point out too, and it might be something I bring up later in our Gloves Off segment, but I just want to mention this too, that just because something has a congressional hearing doesn't mean that it means anything. It just means they heard people talk about it. That's all it means. It doesn't mean that it gives it automatic validity because there's people who are talking about something. They looked at Hunter Biden's laptop for 6 months and they talked about Hunter Biden and all the problems and nothing came of it because there wasn't any evidence. And the same thing, it can happen in other cases. So just because, I don't want people to be tricked to think, well, they're talking about it in Congress. And this James Fox brings this up multiple times. well, they're talking about it in Congress. They talk about a lot of things in Congress, and a lot of those things don't matter. So just don't pretend that automatically gives it this wand of credibility, that it suddenly becomes something that we should pay attention to and that is undeniably true.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this might be something that we end up touching on in a future show. We might touch on Hunter Biden's laptop in a future show, what the evidence is there. But when it comes to the UK Parliament as well, there was a UK Parliament meeting which was talking about the evidence that the COVID vaccine was causing all sorts of damage to people's hearts and causing loads of death. Now, that meeting was not was not in itself evidence that this is true. It was a guy who was working in the Parliament was able to call a meeting and have people tell him stuff that he wanted to hear using one of the rooms in the Parliament. It doesn't mean that is actually concrete evidence. And in a way, you want politicians to be able to listen to things, even if listen to all sorts of forms of evidence without being judged for doing so. But we also shouldn't therefore assume that anything they hear is verbatim truth because it was there.
Just say, oh, Rogan thinks he's smart. And I'm the last person that thinks I'm smart. Trust me.
All right, so we're going to wrap this episode up. Before we do, we're going to talk about some of the things that maybe we liked about it. But I do want to ask you, Marsh, so people know sort of where we stand on this. Where do you stand on things in the sky? Could it be something from another planet? Where do you stand on otherworldly visitations, that sort of thing? Can you give me sort of a broad strokes on where you think you stand on those things?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to start from the other end of that equation, which I mentioned sort of briefly at the start. Is there likely to be life out there in the universe? I'm quite happy to say that it's probable, it's likely. It could well be we live in a universe where we're the only life that ever existed. That would be fascinating. It's just as likely that if it arose here, it arose somewhere else in the universe. So life reasonably might well exist. Now, does that life exist at the same time that we exist? The likelihood is less because the universe is 13.5 or 13.8 billion years old. We've only really existed for a tiny, tiny slice of that. It might be that there were aliens 1 billion years ago. They've died out. We'll never see them. We just didn't happen to align. So the chances that they were around at the same time as us is going to be narrower just because of the way time works. The chances that they're anywhere near us is going to be even narrower because the universe is huge and the ability to get from star to star, unless you're able to do faster than light travel, which we don't think is physically currently possible or physically is possible under our current understanding of physics, the chances that you'll ever encounter any other life in the universe is infinitesimally small because the universe is almost infinitely big. So I think the chances that there's anything near enough to us that to come and visit, incredibly slim. So I think everything that people are seeing in the sky is almost certainly stuff being misidentified, stuff that is a hoax, stuff that is military technology that is being hidden because you don't give all your military secrets away. All of those things are millions and millions and millions of times more likely than it to be aliens. I think it is the chances of us being visited by aliens is next to nil for all of those different reasons. If we were able to turn up one single solid piece of evidence, I would readdress the chances immediately and be willing to change my mind on that. Give me a body that is not composed of carbon-based atoms, but is based on a different element, and we're talking. We'll have another conversation. But for now, no, I don't think any of the things we've seen in the sky so far are likely to be compelling evidence for aliens because of just the unlikelihood of aliens getting here.
Yeah, I'm pretty much on the exact same wavelength you are. I'm think that possibly there is some sort of life out there. I don't think there's any real way for us to even communicate with them. Even just the communications with something like that far away, and also not knowing how to communicate in any reasonable way doesn't feel like there's any real possibility of that. I'm happy to be proven wrong. I am 100% I want to believe this, right? I'm like one of the X-Files guys that's like, I want to believe, I 100% want to believe, but it's not anything that I think is a real thing. I also am like you, I'm happy to see evidence that's absolutely real evidence. But instead, what we see is most oftentimes is blurry photographs, blurry video, and third-hand accounts from somebody who one time got abducted for a little while. I don't believe any of that stuff. It's not, there's nothing in there that feels concrete to me. I'm happy to believe if there's really good, solid evidence, but even the stuff that people say is so solid, it's amazing, it doesn't move me even in the slightest.
Well, but that's the thing is, you and I both wanted to be true that there's aliens. Joe clearly wanted to be true. James clearly wanted to be true. The difference between us and them is that we're not willing to overlook the evidence or kind of conflate the evidence in order to make what we want to be true the case. We're much more willing to say, well, I'd like this to be true, but I'm willing to say right now that I don't think it is until I'm convinced otherwise, rather than starting from the other assumption. I want this to be true, and I'm going to look for evidence as to why I'm right.
I'm going to confirm all my biases by every piece of evidence that I find. All right, so did you think there was anything worthwhile in this episode, Marsh?
Yeah, I did actually. I thought Joe did a pretty good job in large parts of this episode. He'd offered some really good pushback in some places. There were times when he'd asked James a question about a certain type of evidence, and James would say, well, I'll tell you this instead, and go and try to go somewhere else. And Joe would call him back on that and would try and stop him deflecting away from tricky questions into other anecdotes. I thought that was pretty good. I also thought Joe made a really funny point, a genuinely funny answer when he was talking about why aren't there aliens everywhere all the time? And he was saying about how, well, it might be like vacation season where like they can only come now and then because it's really difficult to get here, like trying to go to Australia, and how it takes so many hours on a plane. You just can't always do that. It's a pain in the ass to get there. I thought that was quite funny. I enjoyed that. He was clearly having fun with it, and I enjoyed that. It was funny.
Yeah, I like that too. I like his cautiousness. I think that there was some moments where he even said, like, you know, I think that this is true? Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't, sometimes I do. He's a lot more forgiving than, you know, like, than I would like him to be on some things. I'd certainly like more pushback. And he also seems to apologize sometimes when he does give pushback. He gives pushback and then he immediately apologizes. I'm just playing devil's advocate, which means to me that he doesn't believe completely. He's just trying to do those sort of things and go through the steps of being critical, even though he might not believe it himself. But it's at least a start, and I'm willing to accept that.
I think his apology, you're right that it's interesting. I think his apology might also be because he's not used to doing that on his show. He's not used to doing the pushback on the show. So it feels awkward. It feels counterintuitive for him to be doing that, because that's not normally what he does on the show. But he does ask some good questions. At one point, he starts to ask a good question, whether the UAPs are a massive psyop to cover up the very advanced American weapons technology. And it's like, well, that's a good question, but there is a third possibility that it's just misidentified regular stuff. So it's sort of like it's a false dichotomy. Is it real, or is it a psyop to stop you looking at this incredibly advanced weapon stuff? It's like, well, it could be neither of those things. Yeah, it could be, but questioning whether it's real is still useful.
Yeah, it could be nothing. And I don't want to come off as saying that Joe doesn't at sometimes totally credulously believe some of this stuff, because it comes off sometimes that he absolutely does, and he 100%. But there are points of pushback which surprised me, and I wanted to mention it.
Yeah, they were great. Okay, well, that is it for the main portion of our show this week. You can check us out on Patreon if you want to get our behind the curtain segment, where we get a bit more gloves off and pick out some of the things we didn't talk about on this show. But otherwise, you can join us next week for another piece of the No Rogan Experience.
If you love the show, please rate and share it. If you want to get in touch with us, become a patron or check out the show notes. Go to knowrogan.com, KNOWROGAN.com.